White, and I am the director of the Child Learning Academies here at Richardson ISD, and I'm excited to get to talk with you about technology in the early years. This is a class that I teach at Collin College, and I've done some trainings on it, and so I'm excited to get to share this with you today. We're going to look at the reasons why we let children on our screens and give them the technology. We're also going to look at what some of the research is saying are the benefits, but also maybe the consequences of that, and also look at maybe some appropriate ways to allow children to use technology when they're little. We have to just kind of start out and consider, why do we do that? Why is this kind of the go-to nowadays for even children under the age of 5 and under the age of 2? So right there in the middle, the feedback that I get most of the time is we just need a break. They're going, and we're busy, and sometimes we just need a break, and putting them on a TV or a tablet is or a phone is an easy thing to do. But there are also other reasons why parents choose to give children a screen. They believe that it can promote problem solving, might help them with math, maybe science, language, maybe help introduce them to reading. There are different ways, especially if you put those captions on, right? Help with their hand-eye coordination. And then sometimes it's just entertainment. We all love to watch shows, watch movies and stuff. So often we're cool with just letting them have some entertainment. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not here to shame anybody about using screens, but let's get real about maybe the benefits and possibly the ways that it could be harming our children. What consequences are we starting to see within children as they're growing now that we've had a generation or so coming up on screens? So it's just something we need to ask ourselves before we just hand over our iPhone. I'm going to start here with social development. When we give a child a screen and allow them in significant amounts to use those, often we can be harming their social development. And this gives us a few ways that it does that. It can hinder their ability to read facial expressions. Yes, they see facial expressions, they hear them, they may not match. There's a lot of sarcasm on children's shows, and children don't understand sarcasm. They are expecting the face to be matching the words, and so they don't necessarily understand that. It can hinder their ability to understand social cues. Again, for the same reason, like 80% of how we communicate is nonverbal, and so when they're watching that on a screen, often they cannot understand social cues. It can hinder their ability to understand empathy. For the same reason, there's no back and forth on that. It's hindering interpersonal relationships. We see that all the time. We're seeing it a lot with our teenagers, right? That are not able to have offline relationships because they just have never had those. They haven't had to work through those highs and those lows and things like that. It can lead to being less friendly externally. So they're easily, we see this all the time, right? On social media, people are easy to send off a message or type a comment, but maybe they're saying that they're introverts and they don't want to have those conflicts that happen and the things that happen when we're communicating. It leads to being less open and visible, to potential difficulties in forming relationships later on. And I would even argue we see a lot of children simulating violence. So often in these cartoons, in these shows, in these superhero games and things like that, there's a lot of simulated violence, and there's some of that's very funny aggressions, like everybody's laughing and all of that, but when that's replicated in real life, often it is really more aggressive and children get hurt, and the child who is used to seeing that and thinks that it's funny or thinks that it's socially acceptable will be doing more of those aggressive behaviors. And just a note to that, my own son found that taking superhero shows away created a lot less wrestling and those strong behaviors between his two sons that are fairly close in age. So just by them seeing that and that being their focus on a daily basis, they were often imitating those fun, quote unquote, fun, aggressive behaviors. But then when they took those away, it didn't take very long for their focus to shift and for those to go away. May not happen for everybody, but it worked in that time. So we kind of got to see a little experiment with that. Another area that we look at is emotional development. And one of the reasons, as we said, we need a break. Our child needs a minute to calm down. So we hand over a screen, things like that. And it can be calming for them. But as the AAP says, it often will take away that opportunity for the child to learn how to self-soothe and how to regulate. And isn't that what we all want our children to be able to do by the time that they're 2, 3, 4? They're learning that. By the time that they're 6, 7, 8, we want them to be able to self-soothe. We want them to be able to regulate their own emotions. We spend a lot of time talking about emotions and reading books and all of that. But often when the child is in that moment, we will give them something kind of like a little pacifier to get through that moment. So we want to not use that as a crutch or as a pacifier for them. We want them to learn how to regulate their own emotions. Language development. Excessive screen time can limit the time that children are listening to and interacting with caregivers. So we think, okay, well, they hear a lot of correct language, right? They're hearing vocabulary, they're seeing that, but there's no correction in that. So even when, say, Blue's Clues asks that question to the child, there's nothing that there's no feedback once they give that answer other than Blue, Blue moves on and, that kind of thing. But we want to, when there's human interaction, then we're going to correct the things that they say, or we're not going to understand what they're saying, and we're going to ask them to continue to explain. So that language development they're finding over and over occurs within relationships and things like that. They're not going to just get that language development from watching TV. So one of the resources that I found talked about that learning is more effective with human connection. We talk about that all the time in conscious discipline. Human connection is a key to children's learning. And so we can put them on, they can learn a certain number of things, but really we're the ones that are creating those connections within their brain and things like that. So they need human connection. They need the serve and return of communication, just like I was talking about with Blue's Clues. Like, it's fine that that shows often are speaking to them and trying to get them to think, but that human connection, that human relationship is what creates that serve and return, and it changes. And trust me, AI is not going to fix that. Like, there's not going to be any AI version of serve and return that's going to create that connection. And those human connections create different connections in the brain. And the same thing with movement. When children are moving, they're standing, they're talking, you're doing things, you're going for a walk, you're at the park and you're talking and you're learning. That's when the greatest, richest learning is happening. So even though we want to be for a child, and they may learn a certain number of things off of a screen, but we need to also be understanding that the best learning is going to happen from human connection. Another area of development is physical development. It's very well documented at this point for probably the last 20 years that children are spending too much time on screens, which is contributing to obesity and to poor motor skills and things like that. So it really discourages that as they sit, and it's, that addictive thing that we have. So we want to find ways for them to use that. And often one of the only ways that at our child learning academies that we use screens is for to promote motor skills, to give them videos to watch and to duplicate. Now, I will tell you, children get a whole a lot more out of that video when the adult is with them. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But you want to be thinking that children are going to do what they see the parents modeling, right? And so have you ever considered for yourself or for your children how watching screens during meal times and snacks affects how much they eat? You might do a little experiment on your own, like go a week and have them, kind of track how much they're eating at meal times if you're sitting at a table or away from a screen, and then try it for a few days with a screen and see how much they eat. I know for myself and my family, like there's a lot of just mindless eating that happens at meal times, or some children may be the mindless end and eat too much, but some children may also be on the other end where they don't eat. They just sit and watch instead of taking the time to eat, and it takes too long and they get distracted, and they're not completing their meal times and not getting the nutrition that they need. Now, when we think about cognitive development, this is a lot of the things that parents would cite as being the reason that they want their children, they allow them to be on screen times. But passive screen times can hinder that critical thinking. So we say that we want them to think critically and problem solve, so then we put them on an active screen where they are doing something, right? Like a game or something like that. But there may be consequences to that as well. Secondarily, reading on screens has changed how we read. Now, I can't solve all of that by children not being on screens before the age of 5, but do understand that we are setting children up to not understand how to read a story in a book, because when we read online, we read things at the beginning, and then we look for, say, that thesis as the first or second thing that we read, and then we might read on. And there is they've tracked that it is different when you're reading from a piece of paper than when you are reading on a screen. That's why things like Kindles will try to mimic a piece of paper a little bit differently than just reading websites and stuff. So just acknowledge that their cognitive development is changing on how they're reading. And if we want children to be proficient readers, they're going to need things other than screens to be reading with. And then this last one, with children, they lack the attention span to read the entire assignment on their own. So often they're only going to be scanning, just like we do on our news sources and on social media and stuff. So they're going to lack that grit to stick with it and read the whole assignment. So even with our assignments and stuff that we're handing out, we have to structure those differently for online reading. And that kind of leads into the attention span. This is probably one of the bigger things that we are noticing, and the research is showing is changing with children. And we get that, like, oh my goodness, the children, their attention spans are much lower. But just that constant stimulation from the screens can lead to those shorter attention spans and difficulty focusing, right? And so we're talking about ADD and ADHD. Now, I'm not saying that this is the whole reason, but I am saying children who otherwise may not have had that issue, if they've been exposed to screens a lot, may not be able to have sit in a class, may not be able to do some of these things because their brains are being wired each time that they're on that screen to want that constant stimulation. So as Dr. Jim Taylor says here, technology exposure might actually be changing the way children's brains are wired. I absolutely believe that. It is changing where those connections are, how they're stimulated visually, auditorily, by movement and things like that. And again, like I said earlier, that human emotional connection of being together also, when that's gone, then it's wiring the brain differently to be more visual than it is emotional. So just be thinking about that. One of the issues that we often are seeing now is sensory integration issues. And so as this quote says, and let me move myself around here, Babies and toddlers exposed to television or video viewing may be more likely to exhibit atypical sensory behaviors, such as being disengaged and disinterested in activities. When you're talking about babies being exposed, so they're not going to want to do the things that are active, that are right in front of them. They're going to be looking for that visual stimulation. They may be seeking more intense stimulation in their environment. Those bright lights going, just like you're seeing right now. They're going, when things are darker, when things are more bland in their normal environment, they may be needing that more intensity to be engaged. And then being overwhelmed. So that's the other side, is that there can be an overstimulation that happens and they become overwhelmed by sensations like loud sounds or bright lights. So this is from Drexel, and all of my resources will be at the end. So be considering the fact that all of these things can be causing some integration issues, or the way that the brain is wired for learning and for activity. So one of the things I wanted to talk about really, and this has come up recently in my own learning, is about the difference in cartoon pacing now. So as this data shows that scenes in modern cartoons change every 5 to 11 seconds, which is actually too fast for children. It doesn't give them a chance to process what they're watching. And my resource is Leka on this. And so these cartoons are moving fast. And it's crazy. As one example, Mr. Rogers, they used to change scenes like an average of 3 times with camera cuts with just a few camera cuts in a 20-minute episode. So with my my technology class that I teach, like we actually watch a whole 30-minute episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood because it's 30 minutes and there are very few cuts as it goes through. And so there's lots of, honestly, even watching it, I get a little bored at some point and my brain starts to drift, right? But now you've got, most of their shows are 10 minutes long, and there's like Cocomelon, they change every 2 to 3 seconds. It is going, which means that the child brain is being wired for that. So seek out shows that don't change things, that give that ease, that calmness to a show, because you're actually helping to wire the brain to be able to have that type of attention span. Here's like a visual of the number of seconds just since 2016. We're talking 9 years at this point. The number of seconds that, and this is in all types of video. This isn't just in kids' videos, but it used to be 150, 170 seconds. And now it is, we're down to 75 and 60 seconds. So there's just an average video length that has gotten so much shorter every time they're cutting that, which is affecting how the brain processes. Another thing that we are pretty aware of, especially with the blue light items, is that it interferes with sleep cycles. So even, they suggest we turn off all of our devices before going to sleep, and we can end up with that same thing with children, especially if we're giving them those before they go to sleep or to calm down or something like that. The blue light is really actually affecting them. So be very careful about that. With their sensory development, children are exposed to greater TV viewing by their 2nd birthday. So we're more likely to see atypical sensory processing. We talked a little bit about sensory integration already. They're being either less sensitive to respond to stimuli, or the opposite, where they're going to be avoiding that, or they're going to feel overwhelmed by it. All right. And so this was really big for me, guys. So percent increase of high sensory behaviors and typical sensory behaviors. So at 12 months, if a child had any screen exposure at all in that first year, they have a 105% higher chance of having non-typical sensory behaviors. All right. At 18 months, or high sensory behaviors, right? And so at 18 months, you've got 23% for every hour of screen time. So if they get 1 hour at childcare and an hour at home, that's 46% increase in potential of high sensory behaviors. And then looking at that at age 2 and up, 20% per hour. And often these children, lots of children we know, are on for more than an hour or 2 hours, at least a day, if not more than that. You know, when you think of on your phone at dinner, when you think of, you know, whether they're at childcare, their grandmas, they're watching the shows with you, that kind of thing. So think about how much that is, and then kind of keep this in mind, because it really is, it is making a difference. And especially that before a year, children before a year don't need to see screens. All right. So children, let me move myself over here. Screen addiction is a whole nother issue, right? Children exposed to electronics tend to develop a desire for continued use, creating a potentially harmful cycle. So even more worrisome are the effects of digital media on young children by disrupting parent-child interaction, which is critical to a healthy emotional and cognitive development. These are the things I want to leave you with. This becomes a cycle of children getting their dopamine, getting everything from digital media instead of seeking it out in people. And so, yeah, we see this so much, guys. So understand healthy emotional and cognitive and social development happen in relationship. They do not happen. And I know we can say that, and we're teachers and we know that. But when we get home and we're tired because we put it all out all day long for everyone else, those kids need that number one thing, which is you. All right. The other thing we see is screen withdrawal. So cartoons act as a drug. I was just talking about that fast-paced part, that cycle that happens. And so they start to look for that. And regularly paced activities become boring and they rely on quick entertainment. So that's that rewiring of the brain that occurs. Now, we do want to talk about proper screen technology use, right? So educational content, not a bad way to use that. If we're going to do that, then less than 30 minutes a day. They can have things about new concepts or vocabulary like that. Family bonding. This is the one thing that our licensing even allows, is video calls. If you've got somebody, you've got grandma out of town, you've got dad who's in the military, something like that, that's a wonderful, wonderful way for children to use screens to understand that they can connect with other people. And then sometimes, since if they need some sensory, it can be a benefit of sensory stimulation. So there are some interactive apps that provide that sensory experience for children with developmental needs. So sometimes you'll find occupational therapists and physical therapists and speech therapists using that, because it does promote some of those stimulations. And so this was Discover Magazine's Pediatrician's Guide to Screen Time. Just remember, toddlers are not small grown-ups. They really get drawn in under the age of 2. I think I would say everybody does, but really by flashing screens and lights. So they're just not learning as much as they're just viewing, and it goes so fast they're not processing it, and so they have to be super intense watching it, and so other things become boring. Go slow, use different types of media, and make sure that they're slower pacing. Don't throw them right on that Cocomelon. It goes lots of sound, colors, lights, and all of that. Find things that are a little slower paced that they have to work at to create grip. Help children choose their own content. Give them 2 acceptable choices. Would you like to be on ABC Mouse, or would you like to watch this for 20 minutes, and give them some time limits? Keep devices in a central location. We've been saying that for years and years and years. We want to monitor how they're being used. Don't lose sight of real world experiences. Make sure that they are getting outside, that they're playing, that they're with blocks. You learn so much more from blocks than you do from dragging blocks on a screen. drawing a picture. They need the fine motor. They need all those things that go, not just color by number, right? And be careful of what you're replacing. So to wrap this up, what's the recommended amount of screen time? Ages birth to 2, everyone is saying no screen time whatsoever before the age of 2, none, not in the car, not ever. Just don't. Help them to regulate themselves, give them the attention that they need. Ages 2 to 4, less than 1 hour per day. And after that, it kind of goes up and there's an expectation that school, work, and things like that occur. But understanding that there's a trade-off. Every time they're on that screen, there's a trade-off for that. When to give children their own device. Like I've seen lots of 4-year-olds with their own iPad. You've got to make those decisions, but just know that you are, there's a trade-off to that, right? There's a consequence that you are choosing for them because they do not understand those consequences. So children are eventually going to get their own devices at school. There's debate about when to give them their own phone. Do some research, see what the research does say. What are the experts saying? It's much later than you would expect, and like the going understanding is not to have their own phone and make sure it's completely locked down. Even then, when they're in middle school, high school, they'll probably need it by then. Maybe not middle school, maybe so. And then no social media. Try to keep them off that social media until they're 18 at least. So, but you've got to make those decisions on your own. So I would leave you with, what example are you setting for your own child? Every time they see you on that device, you are modeling for them. So it's hard to put them down in the evenings, and we want to see what's going on online, but you are setting that example, and they're going to imitate whatever example you are setting. And understand that in every one of those moments, you are depriving your child of their number one need, which is your attention. They want your attention, especially if they've been in childcare during the day, especially we know you're tired. We know it's those moments of like, oh, I just need a break. I've lived it, guys. But they need your attention. So find some way to just sit with them, give them that attention, give them that stimulation appropriately. And this is my final word for you from Patricia Kuhl, who's done a lot of research. She says, what we've discovered is that little babies under a year old do not learn from a machine. Even if you show them captivating videos, the difference in learning is extraordinary. You get genius learning from a live human being, and you get zero learning from a machine. So if you look up Patricia Kuhl on YouTube, on her websites, she's got a lot of information that I've really enjoyed reading and watching. So here are my references. You can pause it here if you want to go look up any of those. I know that you can't really click on the links, but they're there. And I may put the links in the notes below. So anyways, I appreciate you being with me today for this toddler talk on technology in the earlier years. My name is Jessica White, and I've enjoyed sharing some of my research with you, and I hope you have a great day.